The title tonight is a victim of the tyranny of the spell checker. I wrote, how do you live with a problem you can't solve? And it didn't like the A, so it substituted the. I didn't notice. I often don't check the checker. So I'm not talking about this one problem only that you can't solve. I think you're probably, if you're a live person like I am, there's at least a few going on at the same time. And I have one that I've studied in detail. Of course, problems are different, and I wouldn't say what I've come up with is going to work for every problem. I think it's an example of how you can deal with a problem you can't solve, how you can live with it, and the fact that you can't solve it doesn't necessarily deprive you of your confidence in moving forward. Now, there's a problem about free will. I'd like to make the problem clear, but I don't want to spend too much time on the problem because I want to point out to you how you survive. I'm going to tell you the problem and why it hasn't been solved for almost thousands of years now. The Torah's position, and it is one of the contemporary philosophical positions about free will, is this. Your will isn't free if what you do is caused by a force outside of yourself. That's not called free will. Free in free will means free from external causation. And of course, if your will isn't free, you're not responsible for what you do. Roughly. Certainly, if you are a creature that has no free will, you're not responsible for anything that you do. And some would say you shouldn't call it doing. Maybe freedom is built into the idea of doing something rather than it's happening to you. So, free will requires no external causation, and free will is necessary for responsibility. Now, the Stoics, who were philosophers in the Roman era, raised a problem. They said there's a certain feature which can only go in one of two ways, A and B. Either way, your picture is wrong. Either way, you can't describe responsibility. It's either A or B. If A is correct, you can't describe responsibility. And if B is correct, you can't describe responsibility. So your picture has got to be wrong. It's got to be a failure. What are the A and B? Well, they said, so far you've only told us what free will isn't. It isn't something that's produced by external causation. But you didn't tell us what it is. And the picture that we get from you is this. You are a creature with all sorts of motivations, features that move you in one direction or another. Desires, hopes, fears, values, impulses, habits. When you're in a choice situation, you have all these inbuilt pushes one way or another. But that's not all you are. It's not all that you are, just desires, hopes, fears, values, twitches, and so forth and so on, because every one of those ultimately is derived from outside of you. All your desires, all your hopes, all your fears, all your values, all your twitches, either they're due to your DNA or they're due to some aspect of your development, your physical development, your cultural development, the influence of your parents and your society, what they would call random events that happen to people, health, illness, accident, mountain climbing, scuba diving, whatever you go through forms your psychology. And your psychology contains within it all sorts of different types of motivations. If at a particular time what happens is just this motivation pushes me this way, and this pushes this way, and this one's stronger than this one. These two are combined against that one, and then you have what in physics they call a resolution of forces. You simply calculate the strength of the forces, and you're pushed to go in one way or another. That's the result of external causation. So, if you believe in free will, you've got to believe that that's not all there is to moving. In addition to your desires and hopes and fears, etc., there's got to be something else which at least sometimes decides which way you go. That thing, that little pocket, is FW. It's free will. So you're there with all your motivations, but in addition to your motivation, there's something called free will. At least sometimes, whatever the constellation of the motivations is, free will decides the way in which you're going to go. And that piece of free will, according to you, has to be free of external causation, so otherwise it's not free. Now, say the Stoics, we have a question to ask you about this free will. How does it operate? And in particular, does it operate according to rules, or does it not operate according to rules? It seems like there aren't any third choices. Either it does or it doesn't. And the Stoic says, I will show you that either way, your picture fails. Either way, you have not succeeded in describing what it means to be responsible for what you do. So, let's start with the first half. Free will operates according to rules. So, here I am. Make a decision whether to do A or to do B. And I open up the free will Pandora's box, and it says, first measure the amount of pleasure you'll get from each one, 16, 22. And now measure how fearful it will be, 4, 19. Now measure the morality of it, 46 and 57. And now measure how frustrating it will be or irritating it will be, pain, 52 and 19. And now measure how much it threatens your hopes or satisfies your hopes, 14 and 33. Okay, now that's the first rules. Next rule is add up all the numbers, divide by the square root of pi, and see which one is bigger. Pick the one with the bigger number. Okay, so that's how I do it. That's how I do it. I calculate all the numbers, and add them all up, divide by the square root of pi, and pick the bigger number. The Stoic asks, and where did the rules come from? Where did those rules come from? How come when you're making a decision you use those rules? Isn't it going to be that they came from some kind of external source? Either they're instinctive to you because of your DNA, which came from your parents, thank you very much, or they're programmed into you by your early training, by your society, and so forth and so on. Either way, if the free will is using rules, then the operation of the free will is also traceable to external causation. And you, says the Stoic, you told me that means you're not free. So according to your own position, this is not a good picture of why you're responsible for what you do. Okay, says the Stoic, let's try the other side. Let's say the free will operates without rules. It doesn't operate via rules. Very flimsy fuss. Here I am again. A or B? A or B? What should I do now? Well, it's A or B, so it's A. I mean, what else can I do? What shall I think about? What shall I take into consideration? What shall I measure? That would be following a rule. If there are no rules, then you just sit there in front of A and B and then something happens. It sort of pops off by itself, arbitrarily. Can a feature of you that pops off arbitrarily, no guidance, no direction, no evaluation, no thought, does that picture you as a responsible agent? You're responsible for what you do because when it comes to a choice situation, you sit there and then something pops off? That doesn't sound like responsibility either. You can program computers with random elements, which plug in, every 10 minutes and cause an operation. That doesn't make the computer a free agent. So, if you say that there are no rules, then the outcome is arbitrary, as we would say, meaningless. If you have rules, it's external causation. Either way, said the Stoics, you have not described responsibility. So your picture of free will fails. That was the Stoics' problem. That problem has lived for almost 2,000 years. There are people today who think they have an answer. One is John Searle, the other is Timothy O'Connor. I'm not going to go through them for you. They are very interesting answers. I think they're very thought-provoking, but only a tiny minority of philosophers think that either of them has solved the problem. The vast majority of philosophers agree that the problem is still outstanding. We don't have an adequate picture of how free will works. Well, free will is one of the cornerstones of Judaism. The Stoic has an argument to show that our picture can't be right. If he's correct, I think it would be appropriate to say that Judaism fails. If free will is a mirage, an illusion, it's a mistake, if at its base it's absurd, it's contradictory, then Judaism fails. What shall we do about this challenge? Assuming that no adequate solution exists. Now, for the sake of the recording, maybe some of you have heard this from me here before, in the recording I will express the common thought that people usually raise, and I will show you why it's inadequate. Someone says, listen, Rabbi, you set it up, the Stoics, you set it up either rules or no rules. Isn't there a vast range in between? How about some rules, but together with the rules, there's also a choice mechanism which isn't dictated by rules. You have rules, and the rules guide your behavior, they guide your decision-making processes, but you have to decide which rules to use, and when to use them, and how to use them, and then it's a combination picture. It's not either all rules or all no rules. It's one of the other. It's a combination of the two. Then you can't say it's all externally caused, and you also can't say it's all arbitrary. But the answer to that question is, let's grant you have the two features working together, some rules and some decisions about how to use the rules, when to use the rules. Now, take a look at the second feature by itself. That feature by itself which decides when and how to use the rules. Okay? Now repeat the same argument. For that feature, does that feature operate according to rules? Or does it not operate according to rules? If it operates according to rules, then it's rules all the way to the bottom. Everything's rules. That was the first half. Then it's all external causation. And if it isn't, then ultimately the decision is based on an arbitrary pop-off event which determines how the rules shall be used and how they shall be applied and so on and so on. And among the various alternatives available, that choice is made in an arbitrary way. So you end up with the very same argument pushed into the half of the picture, which was the half that wasn't bound by rules. Either it is bound by rules or it isn't, and you get the two disastrous consequences. This is the picture of the problem which, at least in today's philosophy, for almost 2,000 years, has not been solved. And it goes right to the heart of things that we believe, not only in the Jewish picture, but in the secular picture also. Belief in free will, every human being naturally, always, continuously, has a picture of himself as exercising free will. Even the people who tell you there's no free will are using free will all the time. That's the way they experience. What they have to say is, we're living this illusion that we can't escape, that we really have exercising free will, but philosophically we figured out that it's really an illusion, but we feel like it all the time. There's no way to escape the feeling. Okay, so they're living in the same world with us, just convinced of a certain idea, which we would call wrong. So the question now is, how to live with this problem, even if we can't solve it. Are we together so far? You want to ask a question?
Is Judaism the only religion which this would affect as a standard?
It is a good question. Is this the only religion that it would affect? My assumption is, though I haven't studied them in this particular question, that Christianity and Islam both share this idea, the idea of free will. Even though there are philosophers who say even with external causation you are responsible, compatibilists, but I think that the traditional religions are libertarian and they would not tolerate that. But I'm not sure. I haven't read them on this. I can't say for sure. Yeah.
I'm wondering, so I know for other problems, like things in regards to like God's nature and other things, we sometimes say we just can't have knowledge of. Can we make the same point for this? We just can't have knowledge of how it works, but we know it exists?
One part of what I'm going to say is along that direction, not in those terms, not in those words, but I want to justify why we would expect that we wouldn't understand why it works. But that's right. That is a way to live with a problem, 100%. Now, in order to introduce this, I want to share with you something. And again, maybe you have seen this, but if you haven't, it's worth knowing. I'm going to write on the board here, so maybe you can do something about the picture, which will capture me while I'm doing it. I want to share with you a little silly idea, which isn't mine.
Professor time now.
Yeah, professor time now, that's right. Elementary mathematics. For those who find mathematics, if you're allergic to it, you can snore through this one. And I'll wake you up for the next one. But I think this has some interest in this.
I think is the one it works for.
Very, huh?
I think you should try if it works. If it doesn't, the red one should work.
Oh, this red one. Okay. Very elementary mathematics. This is the kind of algebra that's taught in 7th grade.
Wow.
I assume that you're all older than 7th grade. Okay, so start with A equals B. Okay? Now, multiply both sides times A. When you do the same thing to two sides of an equation, it stays equal, right? So on this side, you get A squared, and this side, you get B squared. Okay? And now, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, you get AB. No, what happened? Okay, you get AB. We'll get to that later. You get AB. Okay, now subtract B squared from both sides. So here you have A squared minus B squared, and here you have AB minus B squared. Okay? Now, the next thing you do is factor. Okay. Now, on this side, I think pretty obviously you get B times A minus B, right? Because this will be AB, and this will be minus B squared. On this side, you get A plus B times A minus B. Now, you might not be familiar with that, so let me quickly show you that that's correct. So you have A minus B and A plus B, and you multiply. Okay? So A times A is A squared. A times minus B is minus AB. B times A is plus AB. B times minus B is minus B squared. Okay? But now this is AB and this is AB. Minus and plus, they cancel out. And you get A squared minus B squared. Okay? So now we have this. Okay, now the next thing is divide by A minus B. You have A minus B on both sides. So divide by both of them, right? Divide this out and you get A plus B equals B. Okay? But now remember that A equals B. So when I have A plus B equals B, for A I can put in B. Get B plus B equals B. 2B equals B. Cancel out the B's. 2 equals 1. QED. Now, assuming you haven't seen this before, what happened to the cover of this? It disappeared?
I think it's on the.
What?
I think it's on the back of the pen.
Oh, thank you, yeah. If you haven't seen this before, if you have, remember, think back to the time when you first saw it. I think your attitude is, or at least should be like this. Let's see. Colleague, multiply both sides by A, subtract B squared from both sides, factor, divide by the same thing on both sides, add them together, A equals B, so substitute it in. Golly, it looks like the most elementary correct mathematics. On the other hand, 2 isn't 1. Period. It isn't 1. Finished. Not hearing that. I'm betting the problem is in the proof. I don't know where it is. I don't see where it is. I can't tell you where it's wrong, but my bet is it's wrong. And the conclusion is that's simply not appropriate to believe. Even if I never figure out what's wrong with the proof, I'm not going to accept the conclusion because the proof isn't strong enough to overcome the conclusion, the absurdity of the conclusion. When you have a proof, you have a contest between the strength of the proof on the one hand and the ridiculousness of the conclusion. And it is permissible in logic to go either way, to say, golly, the proof has convinced me of something I never would have believed, but look, it's a proof, and I guess that's really true. The other way to go is to say, the conclusion is ridiculous, it's too ridiculous to consider, and I'm going to bet that the proof is wrong. Either way is logical. Neither way is irrational. It's a quite subtle matter to decide which is the appropriate way to go. So, by the way, the mistake here is in this step where you divide both sides by A minus B, because how much is A minus B? Well, if A equals B, how much is A minus B? 0! Can't divide by 0. Not allowed to divide by 0. That's a no-no in mathematics. And just in case you don't know, why can't you divide by 0? What's wrong with dividing by 0? So you say, thank you. You can't divide because, you know why? Because you can't divide. It's wrong. We give you a slap if you do that. Let me just show you why you can't divide by 0. Because 0 times 5 equals 0 times 6, does it not?
Yeah.
0 times 5 is 0, and 0 times 6 is 0. So 0 times 5 equals 0 times 6, right?
Yeah.
And then when you cancel out the zeros, you get 5 equals 6, which is clearly wrong. Okay? Division only works when the numbers on one side, each one of them contributes to the actual value of the thing. Here, the 5 and 6 contribute nothing to the value. So no matter what you put there, it's always going to be 0. Okay. So that's the first thing. You can live with a problem. If the problem is, I've proved something that you don't like, I've proved something which seems to you very difficult to live with, it's permissible, not always is it right, not always is it justified, but sometimes it's permissible to say, I'm sorry, the conclusion is so outrageous that I'm betting the proof is wrong. Like when somebody proves to you there are no real values, or nothing's really true, or nobody knows anything. At that point, it's permissible to say, I'm sorry, that's just too far out for your reasoning to convince me. I'm much more positive that the conclusion is wrong than I am that your reasoning is correct. Okay, that's one way, yeah.
What would be the dividing line? When do you decide which conclusion?
I don't know that there is a strict definition of what the dividing line is. I think it's a good question. But the fact that you don't have it, let me teach you something very important. The fact that you don't have a dividing line doesn't mean there aren't clear cases on both sides. Most concepts, maybe all concepts, have black, white, and gray areas. Somebody says, where's the dividing line? The answer is, it's in the gray area somewhere, but I have black and white examples. And the black and white examples are perfectly well established without drawing the line in the gray area. So it's not necessary to have to draw a line in the gray area. This is like the person who says, define your concepts. The correct response to someone who says, define your concepts is, why should I? Where in the argument did I do something that needs a definition? Not everything needs a definition. Okay, I'm a professional philosopher saying that, so it isn't as if I'm unused to the claim or its significance. Yeah.
It'd just be interesting because then it'd be quite hard to not disprove, but to show someone how their faith would be wrong, because they could always just fall back on that argument, couldn't they?
Well, yes, but on the other hand, if a person goes too far, then he simply disqualifies himself for discussion. Aristotle pointed this out. You point out that a person's ideas contradict themselves. He's espousing a contradiction, and he says, So, the response to that is, have a nice day. If you don't see there's anything wrong with espousing contradiction, you're not party to the plot process. You just don't know, you don't know what we're doing. You have no clue what it's about. I can't talk to you because you're not on the same wavelength. Yeah.
Well, I was wondering about this, like, growing up in the secular math system. How can we even learn math if there are fallacies in its own, like, proofs? Like, we say one equals one, but then somehow...
Okay, I'm not going to now do a whole philosophy of mathematics, but there's no fallacy here. There's no fallacy here. It's simply, if you don't pay careful attention to the details, if once you see that it's dividing by zero, everybody knows that it's a mistake. There's no fallacy here. There's no discussion, no debate about this. Everybody knows it's wrong because you can't divide by zero. So you don't notice that it's zero. Okay, now, yeah, another question? No. So now what are we going to do with our case? So one thing on these grounds you could say is, you're trying to prove to me that there's no free will? Listen, free will is a part of my life. Everything I do is based on free will. I'm much more convinced that I'm exercising real free will than I am that your reasoning is binding, genuine reasoning. And this one approach can be filled out in a little more detail as follows. Let's think about the concepts that are being used in the reasoning. You have the concept of causation. External causation is what makes will not free. And you have the concept of following a rule. And you have the concept of doing something arbitrarily. And you have the concept of responsibility. What's the status of those concepts? Do we understand them well? Do we have agreement about them? Do we have clear definitions of them? The answer in all cases is no. They are very, very difficult concepts. They're subject to gigantic controversy. From one end of the spectrum to the other end of the spectrum, causation is an illusion, causation is a necessity, causation is a figment of just the arrangement of things that you observe. Responsibility itself could be arbitrary, or it's social, or it's logical according to Kant or others. A rule, and what is following a rule? Wittgenstein was famous for pointing out that that's a very puzzling and mysterious concept. So, you're taking concepts that are understood very poorly, and you're putting them together into a witch's brew and coming out with a conclusion. Congratulations. Very likely that when we understand these concepts better, the problem will go away. For example, let's compare this with Zeno's paradoxes. Now again, I'm giving it to you just to get the flavor of it. And I'm telling you the history of it, and you can Google it. Zeno said, nothing moves. Period. Nothing moves, period. Motion is a mistake. It's a mistake, it's an illusion. Nothing really moves. Surprised? Should be. Because as you know, everything moves. No, nothing moves. And one of his proofs was this. If you think things move, then you believe there could be a handicap race. A handicap race is where one runner or horse or whatever is slower than the other one. So in order to make the race interesting, you give the slower one a head start. Then you fire the gun and they run, and then you give them a big enough head start. It could be exciting at the end. Okay? So imagine the race is going this way, and the one in back starts here, and the one in front starts here. Okay? And they're running. Now I'm going to divide the race into stages. Stage one, the one behind runs up to the place where the one in front started. And while he's doing that, of course, the one in front runs some distance. That's stage one. Stage two, the one in back runs up to where the one in front got to in stage one, during which time, of course, the one above ran some distance. That's stage two. Can you guess stage 3?
Yeah.
The one behind runs up to where the one ahead got to in stage 2, during which time the one above ran ahead some distance. Okay? That's how I define the stages. Every time the one behind runs to catch up, the one above runs somewhat ahead. Where's the last stage?
There's no last.
There isn't any last stage. Because at every stage, the top one is ahead something. So it's going to take some time for the one below to catch up. And during that time, the one above is going to move. It gets smaller and smaller, that's true. But smaller and smaller doesn't mean you run out of them. There's no end stage. So Zeno said, if that's the case, the one behind can't pass the one in the front. There's no stage at which he gets past him. Now, the normal response to this problem is, of course he passes him. We know he passes him, right? That's true, but is irrelevant. No one is tempted to believe there's no motion, just like no one is tempted to believe that 2 equals 1. The question is, what's wrong with the argument? Where does it go wrong? What piece of the reasoning is a mistake? According to, I would say, the vast majority of thinkers, it took from 350 BCE, roughly, until the 1850s to figure it out. When the continuum was put in a solid mathematical setting, and you could add infinite sums, then you could give an answer to this question. It took almost 2,000 years to find an answer. What do people do for 2,000 years? They say, well, maybe Zeno's right. It's been 1,000 years. We haven't figured out what's wrong with that. Maybe he's right. Maybe all motion is illusion. No, nobody said that. Now, my message here is this. You've got space, time, and motion. We're pretty good with that. We know those concepts pretty well. If I say, next June 16th, meet me in downtown Houston at such and such a restaurant at 4 p.m. in the afternoon, we'll both be there and meet. We're pretty good with space, time, and motion. Even with them, Zeno could cook up an argument to an utterly false conclusion. No, if you can do it for space, time, and motion, is it shocking that you can do it for responsibility and causation and rules and arbitrariness? Why would that be a surprise? These are concepts that we're much less sure about, with much poorer grasp of. So, that's the first way to live with the problem, to bet that the problem is an artifact of the fact that we have concepts here that we don't understand very well, and that when we understand them better, the problem will disappear. The second way we can live with the problem, I mean we meaning from the Jewish point of view, is to point out that from our point of view, free will, free choice, the exercise of free will, is something that happens in the soul. Now, how do we look at the soul, and what is our expectation? Do we expect to understand what the soul does or not? What do our sources say about that in general, having nothing to do with the free will problem? What is our position on the nature of the soul? It's a big subject, obviously. One feature is this. There's an expression, which goes back to antiquity, that the soul is chelek Elokah mimal, literally a piece of God on high. I will not surprise you if I tell you that from the Jewish point of view, God is not a salami that just slices up into pieces. Chelek Elokah mimal means roughly a thing in the world that God created whose nature expresses godliness more so than any other thing in the world. Well, we don't expect to understand God. That's something which, according to all of our sources, is beyond possibility. So if this thing in the world expresses godliness, it would be natural to think that some aspects of this thing we don't understand. More than that, if you can imagine more than that, our sources tell us that the soul has a certain nature in and of itself, before it comes into the world. But when it becomes into the world and is associated with a piece of material reality, the body, it then loses consciousness of its own nature, of its own character, except for what is necessary to guide the body through life in this environment, in this section of history. So the sources say explicitly that the soul does not understand its own. That is to say, the resources of understanding that the soul has control over while in association with the body does not include the ability to understand its own ultimate nature. Some things about itself it can understand, but some things about itself it cannot understand. This is the reason why spiritual concepts are communicated with physical terminology. This is a deep and abiding idea. Spiritual concepts are communicated with physical terminology. One could ask why that is. One ought to ask why that is. And the classical example of this is King Solomon, who wrote Song of Songs. And Song of Songs is really, in a certain sense, a parable about the love of the soul for God. And the language in its direct use is the language of a love between a man and a woman. Why did King Solomon communicate that pure spiritual idea with a physical comparison? The answer is because there's no other way to do it. The soul in this condition can't be exposed to purely spiritual concepts. It's not able to comprehend them. So for sure in this world, we don't expect to understand everything that the soul is. So now it becomes very natural for us to say, since free will is something that's exercised in the soul, and we don't expect to understand everything the soul does, maybe our confusion about free will is because this is taking place in an element of the soul which under these present conditions we don't understand. That's a second way to live with this unsolved problem. Okay, yeah.
And we say God's bound by the rules of logic, no? If that's the case, then I don't think that would change anything. If he's still bound by logic.
I'm not sure how that's relevant. I wouldn't say that God is bound by the rules of logic. I think that's a very, very misleading way to put the point that I think you're alluding to. What I say is that the rules of logic are the rules of making sense when you talk. So if you violate the rules of logic in your words, you haven't made sense, not binding God by anything. The reason why it's wrong to say, for example, that God can make a square circle is because you've contradicted yourself, so you haven't made sense, not because it limits on what he can do. You haven't expressed a limit, and therefore it doesn't injure his capabilities at all. And that doesn't mean he really can make square circles. It means it's really nonsense to talk that way. And then, the only lesson to learn is stop talking that way. Okay, so that's that. Now the question will be which way is right? Which way of these two ways of living with the problem is right? And of course, at the present time, we don't know. Could we ever know? Of course we could. The day may come when some philosopher will produce a much better understanding of responsibility and chance and causation and will, and he'll solve the problem. That could happen. And then we'll know that solution is a correct solution. If no one ever does that, then we don't know. It still might be true that there is such a solution. No one's found it. No one may ever find it. No guarantee that all solutions that exist will be found. So if we remain ignorant as we are today, then what we say is that there are two possible ways in which this problem could go away, and both of them have independent backing, independent evidence that they are realistic. And any problem for which I have two ways of living with it that are backed by independent reasoning is not a problem that I lose sleep over. Okay? Now these are two ways. Now, I think that the attitude here is the person who's driving you into a corner, who says, I have a proof that X, and he's attacking you with that proof, you can step back and say, okay, he has a proof that X, so what? What follows now? And the first thing to look at is how strong the reasoning is versus the conclusion. There's become a whole industry. A philosopher named Sharon Street wrote a very influential paper, she and a couple other people, and it's become a whole industry. If evolution can explain the development of moral thinking, moral principles, moral behavior, moral judgments, moral intuitions, then either there's no objective correctness to them, or it's impossible to discover whether there's objective correctness to them. Either way, what we think of as objective morality, some of whose features we know, is undone. This has generated a gigantic literature, interesting literature. Thomas Nagel took the point of view that I'm discussing now. He said, look, you have an argument on the basis of evolution and philosophical reasoning that the idea that we have knowledge of objective reality is undone. What am I more sure of? Am I more sure that I know certain things objectively about morality? Or am I more sure that your argument is correct? I'm much more sure of the morality than I am of your argument. So my bets are on that your argument is wrong. In particular because Street and the others show that it's possible that evolution explains morality. They don't show that evolution does explain morality. They show it's possible that evolution explains morality. To which Nagel says, number one, there could be problems in your reasoning, but not everything that's possible is actual. And it may be that there are other features that actually contribute to our knowledge of morality, which aren't captured by evolution. And since all you've shown is that it's possible, you haven't got enough to drive the conclusion that that's the way it really is. And I'm much more confident that torturing small children for fun is wrong than I am of your appeal to evolution and your philosophical positions. So the argumentations, as they put it in their terminology, one man's modus ponens is another man's modus tollens. Modus ponens is where you say, since A, and A, if A then B, therefore B, and you believe B, and the other person says, well, see, if A, and A, if A then B, and B's wrong, then A is wrong, or if A then B is wrong. You either go down or you go up, right? The logic doesn't tell you which way to go. It depends upon where you're more positive that you're correct. This is the way G.E. Moore refuted idealism, for those who know. Yeah?
I'm wondering, wouldn't it almost be like, would it be bad if I'm going into a field saying, this is a view I already have, I'm now trying to find a way, to prove it. And the same thing you talked about in other areas before, like, if this is the stance I have on free will, I'm going into this field now to justify that stance, but at the end of the day, if I can, I'm still going to hold this position. Is that a good mindset to have?
I would say 50%. You're going into the field and you have a position that you believe in. Nothing wrong with that. If it were, almost nobody would investigate anything. To have purity of mind where you're uncertain before you investigate, indeed, it would be, I think, morally obtuse. You never reconsider? You never reconsider? How would you ever learn that you made a mistake? So I think that would be itself. It would be like mental suicide. But I think it works something like this, to give you just a little bit more. This I got from Gilbert Harmon's book, Change of Mind. When you are looking for evidence, reason, what supports what contradicts what, not everything's on a par. There are things you know from different areas of your mind, different types of reasons, and the reasons aren't of equal strength. Tell me, what's stronger? It is so or it must be so? So modal logic, box P implies P. It must be so implies that it's so, but not in common language. Where are your keys? In my pocket. Where are your keys? They must be on the table. That means I don't really know. It means I'm figuring it out. It means, well, let's see now. They're out of my pocket, and usually when they're not in my pocket, they're on the table. So I guess listen to how we talk. I guess they must be on the table. Doesn't that sound funny? I guess they must be. Or is it must be that I guess? Or like, how do must and guess fit together, right? So if somebody comes to me and says, I'm going to prove to you your keys aren't in your pocket, I'm going to say, yeah, try. I know where they are. I put them there half an hour ago. And if he comes to me and says, I'm going to prove to you the keys aren't on the table, I say, well, I haven't been with the table the last half hour, maybe somebody took them away. Okay, let's hear. I'm willing to hear. I know some things much better than I know other things. And it's not just prejudice. I have had certain types of inputs which are better inputs. Do you know that, whether it's raining outside? No. Do you know that you're sitting at a table? Yes! And say, well, let's see. It wasn't raining when I came in. The sky was clear. I'm quite confident that it's not raining outside. I know that much less certainly than I know that I'm sitting at a table. So now it depends upon what is a person, if he's using the weather to prove that I'm not sitting at a table, I'm not buying. Because the weather is much less solid than knowing that I'm sitting at a table. So the only question that arises, I know of, that arises for this is, well, suppose you get something at the top of the chain, something than which nothing else is stronger. Could you ever be driven to give it up? What are you going to compare it against? So that means there's something in your thought system which is out of sight. It can't be challenged. It can't be rethought. So that doesn't sound good. It sounds like the range of reason doesn't reach to that top. But that's a mistake. It's a mistake because let's say something's at the top, but let's suppose that there are several things at the top. Suppose there are several different things at the top. Suppose there's a way of learning things that puts them at the top. When I learn it this way, it goes into the top position, like I'm sitting at a table now. Now let's suppose I got something at the top, and then I have a way of learning things that go to the top, and suddenly the way of learning delivers something which contradicts this one at the top. Then I'm going to be in trouble. And then I might have to reconsider. And this isn't just abstract. This actually happened many times. Is the earth stationary? Are you crazy? Of course it's stationary. You're sitting on it. You know it's not moving. It's obvious it's not moving. Really? Let me tell you something about something. I saw an experiment with a pendulum. To make it vivid, I'll say it's at the North Pole. See, pendulum, they set it swinging this way, and nobody touched it. And then after a while, it started swinging this way, and then this way, and then this way, and then this way. The plane of swing rotated around in a circle. Why did that happen? I saw it! You see the earth is stationary. I saw the plane of swing go around. They both came from sight. They're both on top. Well, if the earth is rotating, you see, then the swing is going to look like it's going around because you're going around. Otherwise, why does it go around? They think, wow, that's a problem, all right. Why does it go around? Because my senses tell me the earth is stationary, and my senses tell me that the plane of swing goes around, and the most natural explanation is that the earth is really moving. So you can attack things on the top. If you have other things on the top, or you have a mechanism which puts things on the top, you can create a conflict and you can come to revise even things at the top. Which means there's no arbitrary limit to the reach of reason. Reason can reach all the way to the things that are most solidly known. I think that's very good. It makes it a much more natural picture that nothing's outside the scope of reasoning. Reasoning, said Harman, is an attempt to organize your beliefs so that you have the maximum support for the things that you believe. And that may mean changing what you believe. So, there are people who outgrow anti-Semitism by meeting Jews. Because the anti-Semitism came to them through hearsay, and now they have their own personal experience. I'll give you one example, then I'm going to quit. There was a famous British philosopher, Alfred Jules Ayer, A-Y-E-R, whose mother was Jewish and father was not. Very famous 20th century philosopher, an atheist his whole life. He remained an atheist. And in particular, being an atheist, he didn't believe in an afterlife until he had a death experience. He had a heart stoppage. This was a year before he died. I think he was in his 80s. And he had a vision during that death experience. And when he came out of it, he wrote a memoir called, What I Saw After I Died. And he said, look, according to the philosophy that I have espoused my whole life, this shouldn't have happened. So I have to rethink. Maybe I'm wrong. No, I'm not wrong about God, but I may be wrong about an afterlife. I may be wrong about the idea that thought and experience are dependent upon the body. I may be wrong about that. Not positive that I'm wrong, but I may be wrong. Because he experienced it. Can't deny that. Can't doubt that. So, that being the case, something that was his chief philosophy, for which he was one of the famous atheists in the world, was an experience he could come to doubt it. That's what reasoning is like. And that's why there's room here to live with problems that you don't know how to solve. Okay.